What is going on, Playmakers? Happy New Year. Welcome to the Working the Wire podcast. I am your host, Big Play Blake. You can follow me over on Twitter at Big Play Blake. The gentleman to my left, your right, sporting more facial hair this week, the advocate for avocado toast, the sultan of social distancing, the connoisseur of craft beer, the who's who of Whole 30, Big Play Beats. What's going on, brother? Happy New Year!
I love it. You know, it's New Year, new me. I feel like I have
right.
to. I feel like I have to toe that line for our group.
Toe that line for our group. I'm gonna need you to go into. I'm gonna need you to elaborate.
I feel like I need to be the guy who says that. I feel like I'm gonna be like, I've been hitting the gym. I've been eating Greek yogurt. I've been doing all
Are
this
you
good
New
stuff.
Year's resolution guy, Michael?
No.
No?
I believe that you should have habits, and if I'm not doing it now, it's not a bad thing. But for me, it's more about having good habits and stuff.
You strike me as a New Year's resolution guy.
That's why I was saying I should be. I feel like I have to be our New Year, new me type guy. But no, I could use them. I could use it, like hitting the gym more consistently. I could use that resolution.
We could all use that, my friend.
I'm a quarantine
me.
like 30. I swear.
Quarantine 30. Is that the new like freshman 30?
That's what I'm going with.
Perfect.
Everybody else is doing it, right?
I love it. Well, guys, like I said, welcome to the Working the Wire podcast. It is Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. It's weird to say that now. I'm happy that we no longer have to put all 4 digits in the year on all of our stuff that we sign the date on.
Oh, yeah.
So, did you hear about that last year?
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah, that was something my wife told me very early on in the year. So, but guys, we are live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern. We offer our last-minute Sunday advice on NFL Sundays. We will do the same this week. We will not stop for the postseason. If you have some daily fantasy sports questions, got a guy that you have a question on, maybe a matchup issue that you're not uncertain on, we are happy to help. Use our hashtag that you see right below here, AskWTW on Twitter. We will get to all those questions and more. And hopefully as we get into things going into next season, and as we talk with the Playmakers this off season, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to look later in the show, we'll get your guys' input. We'd like to add a segment in next season to where we get questions during the week from the Playmakers, and we answer them live here on the show in your own little segment. So please feel free to use that as we move towards that. Michael, let's start with 3 and out, my friend. And I thought, in the spirit of New Year, new me, as you so aptly put it, let's pick 3 stories or 3 things from this season that, we can reflect on. This whole show is going to be kind of a recap or a reflection on the season, right? In our first year doing this show. And Mike, I think the first story that comes to mind, and I think this is on not only the mind of the Playmakers and fantasy football players, but really everybody, right? And that's COVID-19. And I think that easily was the biggest hurdle we all had to jump this year, both personally and in fantasy football. And Mike, it's happening even now as we go into Wild Card Weekend. Today it was announced the Cleveland Browns are going to be without head coach Kevin Stefanski. I know you as a Brown fan and most of our fans over at Big Play hate to hear that, but hey, it happens. There's a couple other staff members. I know Joel Patonio, starting guard for the Browns, is also one of the folks that tested positive. So a lot of different things that COVID had an impact on. So what were your thoughts on COVID and how it impacted the season?
I think the way the NFL handled it was decent. So I think that's the first thing. That's the first thing I want to kind of point out. Like, look, there was a point where when the Ravens were missing and pushing games back, Bills had a bunch of people. The Broncos were really looking ugly. I was like, oh, this is bad. I don't know if we're going to make it. And I was trying to stay positive the whole season. Sure. And it got really dicey.
And I see in the chat, Mike, that we lost audio for a little bit. Folks, we're talking about COVID, just kind of what it all went into this season. But go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yep. Sorry. I think that had to do with my headset.
That's okay.
We should be good. So for me, it was like, I did not doubt that the NFL was going to do it really would have taken like 10, 15 teams having huge outbreaks, I feel like, for the NFL just be like, nope, we're done. I thought it, so that was kind of made sense to me. But other than that, like, it didn't, I don't know. It was something like as a fantasy manager, I was constantly on my mind. So it's just a little more stress because it's like instead of like, oh,
Yeah.
I have these guys picked up, right, whatever. All of a sudden you see somebody on a team has it, and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I can't afford that my running back to be out. Will it be a close contact? Will it be something like that? So for me, it was mostly about just managing the stress and like keeping in the know on it and hoping to miss any like outbreaks. And most of my
Well,
players actually did.
the one thing I hope it brought to the playmakers' attention was attention to detail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously we saw a situation in Denver where you lost a whole position group for a game, right?
Horrible.
2 weeks ago, when the Browns played the Jets, whole position group basically gone, no receivers. So I think one thing it made folks do is pay a little more attention to detail, obviously not for only your players, but the players that surround them, such as the Browns 2 weeks ago. If you had a Baker Mayfield, right, as a streaming start, that's something that obviously affected that situation. So, one thing, like I said, I hope everybody was a little more attentive to were the details, and hopefully, Mike, and we'll knock on wood here. We don't have to deal with this in 2021. I think with everything that's going on in the real world with the vaccines and things like that, we haven't talked much about this on the show because we like to keep it pretty light here. But,
Mm-hmm.
the one thing I am very hopeful for, and the thing that I look back on and I think we're moving in the right direction with these vaccines and things like that, is that we won't have to deal with this in 2021. Or if we do, it'll be very few and far between, right? So,
Yep.
because I don't think this pandemic is going anywhere, but I also think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we eventually got to get past it at some point, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so I hope that this time next year, as we're all celebrating Christmas and holidays and whatever holiday you celebrate with your families, we're all back together, we're all happy, we're not dealing with this, and we've moved past it. So, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it made for an interesting year. I think it definitely separated the the commissioners the weak from the strong, man. I know there's a lot of leagues that kind of freaked out, and
Yeah.
we did a pretty good job. I commissioned the one league that we have the belt in. Obviously, Big Play Eddie, commissions the other leagues, and we all got through it, man. And hopefully you, the playmakers, did as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Mike, I think the other thing that immediately comes to mind this season, and it also had to deal with guys being out, were the injuries this year. And we talked about it on this show ad nauseum. There were a lot of guys, big names too, guys like Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, Odell
Yeah.
Beckham, Dak Prescott. That's just naming a few off the top of my head,
Yeah.
who were out for either a majority of the year or all year in some cases. So, Mike, as we look back on 2020, what's one injury in your mind that had the biggest impact? Guy that missed let's say 8 weeks or more, right, half a season.
Yeah.
Who had the biggest impact fantasy wise in your eyes from these injuries?
So I saw it personally, and then when you can actually see the production I expected out of George Kittle this season,
Yeah,
that was the one that was for me. I had him in multiple leagues. I was betting all in on him. It's similar to, I treat him like Kelsey, where I basically saw
Yeah.
him as a wide receiver that I could put in my tight end position. So that was one that was big for me. He missed weeks 9 through 15, and that was after he missed weeks 2 and 3. And it wasn't like he got injured in the practice week. He got injured mid game, so that hurts you that week and then going forward, especially because you probably had to maybe reach a little for him. And he was somebody I wanted to reach for. He was somebody my plan was to kind of build around him a little bit in some leagues where I didn't have a top pick.
sure.
And the thing that really kills there is his backups, like Jordan Reed, they saw decent production when he was out. So it would have been realistic to project that he would have continued to thrive in Shanahan's offense. So that was one that, for me, I really struggled with, just because it's a thinner position. There were people's like Tanyan and stuff that you were able to eventually stream or put in there and kind
Right.
of get a nice roll from, but it's not a position that's easy to backfill. So that's why I thought that was a really devastating one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And George Kittle was, he's the top two tight end in this league. We talked about it before on this show. Him and Kelsey are 1A and 1B. I would say he's the 1B to Kelsey's 1A, but still, they're 6 and 1, half dozen the other. They're two of the best in the game, and that's just that. Mike, the guy that comes to mind for me, and wondering if I get a little flack because of this one, because he's a quarterback, is Dak Prescott. And Mike, the reason I say that, one, Dak Prescott probably would have finished the season as a top 5 quarterback in his own right. And then you look at something like how it affected everyone else around him. Ezekiel Elliott had a down year in many regards. Same goes for Amari Cooper. You look at a guy like CeeDee Lamb, and we're going to talk about another rookie wide receiver here in our ugly, unexpected, and or our usual unexpected and ugly here in a few moments. Could have CeeDee Lamb been in the same shoes as a Justin Jefferson, right? So
Yeah.
you look at these positions and you look at a guy that affects everything around him. And I think at Dak Prescott, this team was playing from behind in most games because the offense wasn't putting up a ton of points, and it really impacted the Cowboys in a whole from all the guys we just mentioned's fantasy perspective. They all had down years when you compare it to their seasons of the past. So now, obviously, the low-hanging fruit here is a guy like Christian McCaffrey and Barkley, and that's kind of, you look at a guy like that, and no kidding, the first and second picks in most drafts both were done for basically the whole year. So, I think those guys need to be mentioned here as well. And even a guy like Michael Thomas or Odell Beckham that didn't miss the whole season, but obviously the injury they had impacted their season in a big way. And it's unfortunate we have these injuries every season, but this year, Mike, it just felt like we dealt with a lot more than many years past.
Oh, absolutely.
So just add it to 2020's resume, if you will.
It really was, yeah. The only reason I didn't go with like a Michael Thomas, because he's somebody who can take the top off. He just draws so much attention, which makes things easier for Kamara, for Murray, for Breeze, or Taysom Hill, whoever's in there. The only reason I didn't is just because there was a lot of depth at the wide receiver position this year.
There was.
And I think
a lot of young guys stepped up.
Yeah,
a lot of young guys stepped up in a big way this year at the wide receiver position.
Yeah. And I think your point on Dak is so on point just because he had such an effect. That offense went from being an offense we all were like, that's going to be explosive. Look at those weapons on the outside. Look at this running back. You're going to have to pick your poison. And then all of a sudden they're just absolutely garbage for several weeks.
Well, they went, Mike, for many people thought they were going to be a big dog in the NFC.
Yeah.
I mean, they despite that defense being as bad as it was, they thought just because of the offensive support production, they were going to be one of the big dogs. And Dak was on pace to have a better season than Russell, than he was right there with Mahomes. I mean, he was on pace to be up there with the big dogs in terms of fantasy relevance at the quarterback position. But then, like I said, it's a trickle-down effect. What rolls downhill, and it rolled downhill right on top of Zeke and Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb's head. Mike, I think CeeDee Lamb has just as good of a season as Justin Jefferson if Dak's and behind the center. I really do.
Yeah, I thought they were very comparable coming out of the draft. So yeah.
Yep. So, but Mike, speaking of bad things this year, let's have a little transparency with the playmakers out there.
We're gluttons for punishment. We're just like,
we are gluttons for
punishment. Here's a softball, playmakers.
Here's a softball. Feel free to beat the hell out of us with it. Mike, what I want us to do here is take one take we had going into the season. And granted, we only had an episode or two before the season started this year because we did get on the ball a little late in terms of getting the show out there this year. But let's each take one of our takes, and it could have been even early in the season. Mine was preseason. Mine was pre-fantasy football drafts. And let's take a take and come clean on it, my friend. Okay. And I'll start. Mike, one of the worst takes I had this year, and I go back to sitting and having a beer with Big Play Eddie at one of our fantasy football drafts, and I feel bad because I steered a couple people in the wrong direction with this, is I said Deebo Samuel was going to be a top 10 wide receiver this year.
Yeah.
And Mike, he ended up finishing 96th in ESPN.com standard leagues, 33 catches, 391 yards, 1 touchdown. Now, there's a caveat to this. He did miss 10 games due to injury, so, you can't control that. And Jimmy Garoppolo did miss quite a bit of time as well. So, my worst take, Deebo Samuel, top 10 receiver. Mike, he was barely, I mean, by the skin of our teeth in the top 100. So,
yeah.
But you win some, you lose some, my friend.
Yeah, he's a guy that I thought they were going to try to get the ball to a lot. You can't predict an injury, but yeah, it was.
And
really
the reason I said he would, and the reason I said he'd be top 10, Mike, is because he was so versatile in that offense a year ago, right? They found a lot of ways to get the ball in his hands, as you just said, and that's both in the passing game and the running game. So it's just one of those things where between health and quarterback health and game plan, they just couldn't get it done with him this year. So, no. But I think he'll be a decent receiver next year. I definitely expect him, as long as he's healthy, to finish much higher than 96th. So,
yeah.
And actually, I'm very high on their Dolphins, that 49ers wide receiver core. I like him and Ayuk with Kittle. I think that's going to be a nice offense, so long as they can continue Garoppolo's, I don't want to call it development because I feel like he's a veteran at this point, but continue at least an upward trend at the quarterback position. So.
Yeah, they need some consistency. Then health is again another
Yes.
issue there. But
As I've said 100 times, if I haven't said it once, I've said it 100 times on the show. Your best ability is your availability, and that's not a dig at the players. I know they can't control that, but in fantasy football sense, it is. So
yeah.
But who was your worst take of the year, Mike?
I usually like to give wide receivers like 2 years. I thought this wide receiver class was spectacular coming out, and one of the guys I thought, I don't want to say people were sleeping on him considering he was the 12th pick in the draft, but Henry Ruggs. I honestly was just really let down by the production here. He missed a couple weeks, but he only ended up putting up 84.1 fantasy points, 26 receptions, 452 yards, only 2 touchdowns. I saw him as a big play, every type receiver. Honestly, I was looking at him as like, hopefully he's a future, like, and this is the ceiling for him, is a Tyreek Hill type player with that elusive, that incredible speed, and the fact that he didn't just make easy catches where he outran people in college. So I was really looking into him having a blow up season, and I usually don't like to do that with rookie wide receivers, but he was one I wanted to, and it just didn't happen. I'm not cooled on him next year. He's right now an early favorite for me as a sleeper for next year, but we'll see.
Yeah, I kind of likened him, and I was high on Ruggs coming into the season as well, and I almost thought of him as kind of like a Steve Smith, right? Kind of that type of receiver. Yeah, to give him a historical comparison, as a Steve Smith, not a guy that's going to score 15, 16 touchdowns, but a guy that could score 8, 9, 10 touchdowns and 1,000 yards and have a good season. It wasn't not your top 5, but also not your outside the top 15 guy. So yeah. Ruggs was a bit of a disappointment, my friend. I gotta agree with you there.
I give myself I'll give myself that.
Gave yourself the buzzer. Yikes. Yeah. Well, Mike, let's move on to the film room, buddy. Let's talk. We've done our usual unexpected and ugly picks per week this season, and we've done it for the last 16 weeks straight. Mike, what I want us to do this week is let's do it for the entire season, all of 2020, regular season, obviously. And Mike, I'll let you start, buddy. Who was your usual suspect for 2020?
My usual suspect.
Sus, you playing Among Us, Mike?
I was playing Among Us, yeah.
There you go.
Davante
Adams was sus,
yes. No. He was not sus. He was all about it this year. I'm all about him this year. Look, absolute fantasy monster. He was the top point scorer for wide receivers and top points per games for wide receivers. And those top point scorer was only through 15 games or 14 games. Sorry, 115 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 18 touchdowns.
Monster.
Just short of 360 points. Just an absolute monster year. Everyone's talking about how the Packers didn't give Aaron Rodgers another weapon. Well, Davante Adams made them look like a genius. He caught almost 78% of his 149 targets. So for that, like the efficiency, everything about it, you knew he was going to get his each week, and that's why he's my usual suspect this week, or for the year, I should say.
Yeah. No, I love the pick. And Mike, let's do this week. Let's go usual, unexpected, ugly.
Right,
just since we're doing it for the year. And Mike, my usual suspect, and this is a guy, Mike, I find myself over the last year trying to fight the notion that he's a top 5 running back. I really do, but I hate to say it to myself, he is, and that's Derrick Henry. He is, Mike, by far and wide the most physical runner in the NFL. 378 carries this year, over 2,000 yards. Has the rushing title for this season and 17 touchdowns. Mike, over 215 points on ESPN.com standard leagues. He is a bona fide stud at running back, Mike. Derrick King Henry of the Tennessee Titans. And Mike, the only thing that worries me, and this is, obviously as we look forward into 2021 and beyond, especially in dynasty leagues, is the mileage, right? Yeah. We see guys like him in the past who have run hard, guy like Marshawn Lynch, the wear and tear eventually catches up with you.
Yeah,
and as much as they like,
usually pretty quick.
The fall off is quick and it's fat and it's hard. So it's one of those things where I expect him to continue this for at least a couple more years. But be paying attention to that, especially in dynasty leagues, especially as we move forward, into 2021 and you start doing your throwback leagues and everything. It's a guy that there's going to be, like we said, probably a hard and fast drop off, but not anytime soon. So just keep an eye on it though. So, but who's your unexpected, buddy?
My unexpected this year was Justin Herbert.
Okay.
He was mostly not drafted.
Yeah, undrafted in all my leagues.
Yeah, dynasty leagues, I'm sure he was picked. But now he's the 9th best quarterback in fantasy. Look, he threw for 4,336 yards, 31 touchdowns, 10 INTs. I love seeing that out of a rookie, not turning the ball over too much. And then he tacked on 234 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, and he did it with 1 less game than most QBs as well, because Tyrod Taylor started the first one and then was surprised with his start against Kansas City. He shined, and I'll be honest, I questioned his transition. I thought I did, when we actually did the draft show, one thing I said about Herbert was that I thought it was interesting. I was excited to see him in a pro offense, but I didn't know how he would transition right away, so I thought it was a good thing to sit. He blew off my expectations, like just blew him out of the water. Turns out Oregon's offense was probably what was actually holding them back. So I'm really excited to see his game next year. We all know about the sophomore slump. The pros start to get a little film on you, and they really hone in on what you're doing. But I'm excited for this kid. He really showed us some stuff, and as an athletic quarterback too, he adds that his legs, which we see with like guys like Josh Allen, obviously Lamar Jackson, and then people like Patrick Mahomes, where we underrate their rushing ability. But this guy really has it, so I'm excited for him. He's my unexpected for the 2020 season.
No, I like that pick, Mike, and I think he's going to be somebody that's going to be fun to watch, especially with that young. They have a lot of nice pieces out there, and the Anthony Lynn firing this week on Black Monday, and that's something we don't have in the notes to talk about in the show, but I'm sure we can chuck in at some point. Oh, yeah. Just the firing and things. With the firing of Anthony Lynn, if they can get the right guy in to build this offense around him and guys like Austin Eckler, I think they're in for a good transition out in LA. And that division, Mike's an exciting division. I would say of the 4 teams in that division, the Chargers probably have the best defense on paper. Probably the Chiefs, maybe, if everybody's healthy. But, the Chargers have a lot of nice pieces coming back. Joey Bosa's coming back. Ingram should be back. Obviously they moved a couple defensive backs, but you have a guy like Derwin James that'll come back healthy who struggled to stay on the field. So that's going to be an exciting division, especially in what I'm assuming will be a track meet with the Chiefs for the next 5-6 years.
Yeah,
so
set up that way for sure.
Right. Mike, I will continue the Justin theme with the unexpected for the season, my friend. I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson. I mentioned him a little bit ago in 3 and Out, the rookie wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. Mike, 88 catches, 7 touchdowns, 1,400 yards this season, broke the Vikings franchise rookie receiving yards record, previously held by Hall of Famer Randy Moss. So pretty good company to be in, Mike. Mike, the thing I like about Justin Jefferson is, and I like these guys that kind of come in with a little bit of a little pissed off, if I may be transparent. He's a 5th wide receiver taken in 2020 draft. Felt that he was undervalued by a lot of teams. He got drafted behind guys that we just mentioned: Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Reagor. Obviously, those teams, other than maybe the Cowboys, are probably kicking themselves now because Justin Jefferson's a bona fide top 10 receiver heading into next year, Mike.
Yeah.
As long as Kirk Cousins can stay at the current level he's at or improve a little more, Jefferson's in line for probably wide receiver 1 production next year, even with Adam Thielen there. So it's kind of crazy to think about that for a minute, if you will. You have 2 guys on the same team that are probably wide receiver 1s in most fantasy formats next year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate that. Obviously, Thielen will be, I think he has 2 or 3 more years on his deal, so it'll be curious to see how they navigate that. But, Justin Jefferson, for my money, Mike, and he's a guy I picked up as a flyer in the late rounds of my Dynasty League, and boy, am I glad I did. He's my number 2 receiver behind Calvin Ridley on my team. So it's definitely a guy that if you have him in a Dynasty League, you hit the jackpot if you took a flyer on him, and I'm grateful to say I am one of those guys. So very impressive, very impressed with him. Like I said, it's good company when you're breaking wide receivers like Randy Moss's record. So it's
Hall of Famer, no big deal.
Yeah. So arguably top 5 receiver of all time. So in the conversation, I would say top 10 definitely.
For me, he's up top 2, top 3. I think he's just not many wide receivers change the outcome of games as much as Randy Moss could.
And did it on how many different teams too, and had the same production. So
yep.
It's insane, my friend. Who is your ugly for the year?
My ugly, I hate going to these, but Carson Wentz.
Right?
He's a guy a few years ago. I just loved how efficient they were in Philly, and it's just been a slow downhill. And this year I wanted to blame the offensive line. I wanted to do all that stuff. I don't know who to blame at this point, but look, he ended up
Yeah.
he was the 11th quarterback with average draft position or pick.
Yep.
He ended up 21st in total points, and he honestly wasn't startable just due to his inconsistent play. Look, he had 15 interceptions, only 16 touchdowns, and 2,660 yards. And like people drafted him. I was not one of these guys. I'd been burned by him already, but some people drafted him ahead of Aaron Rodgers, Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, Tannehill, and more. And he really struggled.
All guys that finished ahead of him.
Oh yeah. So if you, especially like an Aaron Rodgers, have an MVP season, if you're getting picked ahead of those guys, you really expect some value out of it, and he just wasn't providing it this season. So it was an ugly look, and it ended even uglier with getting benched, and now we don't even know his future.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, Mike. And obviously it's reported by Adam Schefter and some other folks that he's going to request a trade this offseason. In your mind, from a fantasy impact, where is the best place for Carson Wentz to go? I'll let you give your pick, and then I'll give you my thoughts.
Oh, the problem is I haven't dug into this too much because he's going to be hard to trade. It's not an impossible contract to trade.
It's not possible, but it'll be very difficult to move. It would likely require some restructuring to move him. Yes.
Yeah. So he's going to have to, if he wants to play, if that's his thing, he's going to have to make some concessions there. Oh man. There are some teams that could really use. Man, I don't know. I'm
going to give you two. I'm going to give you two.
All right.
Yep. But go ahead. Or you want me to go?
Go ahead. I'm struggling.
All right. So it's funny because my guy Ben Peters just jumped in the chat saying "Go Steelers." Mike, Carson Wentz will still play in the state of Pennsylvania in the next 3 years, but it will not be in Philadelphia.
We got a comment from another Joe Schittsburg. If Big Ben goes, they agree with you.
Yeah. Joe, and that's exactly. I've been saying it for the last 6 months.
Yeah,
that
you have.
Carson Wentz is bound to play in Pittsburgh. I just have this. I have nothing to base it off of, but pure speculation and pure just putting puzzle pieces together. Right? I feel like I should have a tinfoil hat on as I talk about this, but I feel that Ben Roethlisberger. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the Steelers don't win the Super Bowl this year.
Okay.
Ben Roethlisberger probably comes back for another year. There may be a backroom handshake deal for Carson Wentz after the 2021 season. Ben's money will be off the books. The Steelers will be able to take on that kind of money because Wentz is still technically making less than Roethlisberger. Mm-hmm. So I think that Carson Wentz will be a Steeler, and that would be the best fantasy situation for him because obviously and this is considering the offensive line all stays intact. If Villanueva doesn't retire, Pouncey's rumored to be retiring when Ben retires. We'll see if that actually happens or not. But as long as the offensive line stays intact and these receivers all stay in shape, he'll have Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, James Washington throw the ball to, arguably the best total encompassing wide receiver core in the NFL right now. Yeah. So it's going to be very interesting to see where he goes. I think Pittsburgh or Mike, I think this could happen as soon as next year. And that's the Indianapolis Colts.
Wow. Okay.
If Uncle Phil retires, do not be surprised if the Colts make a run at Carson Wentz. I'm not saying either of these trades get done or if this is gospel, right?
Yeah.
But the two teams that are number 1 and 2 on my Carson Wentz radar, or the Carson Wentz sweepstakes, would be Pittsburgh and Indianapolis.
Okay.
So,
do you think Chicago makes another run at an expensive quarterback after like they did with Foles this year?
I do not. I think Chicago has gotten burned too many times with bringing in guys. I think they're going to want to bring in somebody organic. I think they keep Mitch Trubisky around on a friendly deal until they can get to that point. So,
okay.
I don't think they continue with these guys as their future, but they'll have them as their backup plan, so to speak. So, but Mike, let's get into my.
Telling that you need to get on PUBG, by the way.
My back already hurts from carrying those guys.
Very nice.
But Mike, let's get into my ugly pick this week. And what I did, or this year, I should say, and I looked at guys that played in all 16 games. I didn't want to dogpile on the guys that have been injured. Obviously, we talked a couple of weeks ago on the show about injuries and fantasy football and players getting a little irritated with that. So I wanted to pick a guy that had played in all 16 games this year. No justification other than he just had a bad year.
Okay.
And that's Darius Slayton, wide receiver for the New York Giants. 50 catches, 761 yards, 3 touchdowns this season. And Mike, that was, he was, he's at 72% of his numbers from last season. So it's definitely not been a good season for him. He's had a healthy Danny Dimes all season, most of the season, I should say. That running game was intact for the first few weeks, but they had a guy like Wayne Gallman come in and really keep the running game going. So not a ton of blame to be put on the running game. And Mike, the defense was bad, so it wasn't like they weren't playing from behind in most games. So
Mm-hmm.
there's really no excuse for Darius Slayton to have a bad season. Like I said, not a terrible season. I think he still was down around 50th. But when you look at that in terms of the wide receiver production this season, 50's basically on the fringe of being cut from your roster. So
Yeah.
definitely one of those guys who come into the season as a wide receiver one for the Giants, and I think the Giants may be targeting a wide receiver in the draft now.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that. Mike, let's navigate our way over to our fantasy locks for Wild Card Weekend, my friend, and let's recap our season. And we'll start with our picks from last week. T.Y. Hilton was mine. Mike, you had 3 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown. So I will take my last and 11th win for the season. 11
Heck
out of
yeah.
16. Not so bad. 11 out of 17. Not so bad. I'll take it. Wish I was a little bit higher, but not overall too bad. Mike, who was your pick last week? I believe it was Michael Gallup, right?
Yeah, Michael Gallup only had 4 catches for 49 yards. I'm not taking a point. I suck.
I was leaving it up to your interpretation, my
No,
friend.
I'm not taking that. I'm not taking the 8.9 in PPR leagues. It's just below my threshold, but I'm not taking anything. I'm not doing the half points I was doing earlier in the year either. This week though,
if that's how if you wanna, that's fine. I'll allow you to take it. So just to recap, so Mike had 7 locks hit on the season, and I had 11. So I will give myself the crown this year, my friend.
yep, you can take that
So
belt that's in the corner.
yeah, that's right. Hey, there we go. Playmakers, I tell you what. If we get this, let's see. How many retweets do we want to get, Mike? Retweets on the show. If we can get 50 retweets on the show for this week, I will buy us a belt for our fantasy locks every season. I will go online next week and I will buy us a belt. I'll get it. I'll wear it on the show for the next couple weeks after I get it. So 50 retweets on the show. Me and Mike will get a nice one of those dynasty belts to commemorate who wins the fantasy locks for the season. So
All right, let's go. 50 retweets.
50 retweets. It's on you, playmakers. But Mike, obviously this week there's no fantasy leagues going on still. At least one's normal leagues, anyways, is what I would call them. But there's daily fantasy sports going on. So playmakers, what we want to do for you guys, at least for this postseason, and I think it's something we're going to try to bring more into the fold next season, is some daily fantasy sports stuff. I know that's one of the feedback items I got from a few playmakers was, hey, you guys don't talk a lot about daily fantasy sports. Well, we kind of figured locks and things like that kind of encompass that, but we're going to take a little more focus onto that in 2021, something that's on Mike and I's list. But we'll give you guys our daily fantasy lock for this week. And Mike, I'll start. I'm going to go with J.D. McKissick from the Washington football team. Only $5,400 on FanDuel. These are all FanDuel salaries for the full roster games. And Mike, this is a guy that you've kind of been riding all season due to the way he catches the ball out of the backfield and some of the things he does for that offense. Antonio Gibson's a little banged up, was running pretty gingerly last week. But the Bucs, Mike, don't defend the run great. I mean, they're still a good defense, don't get me wrong. But, they're definitely more of a passing defense than they are a running defense. So I don't expect them to change much heading into this week, do what they do best, and just try to get out of there with the W. But Mike, J.D. McKissick, a guy that I like his matchups against some of those lower end coverage guys for the Bucs. So, What about you, buddy? Who you got?
I'm gonna go with Deontay Johnson. He's only a 7,000 salary. He 8 of the 9 last weeks he had over 10 targets, and the Browns secondary is suspect at best, and they're likely to be dinged up still. So Ward is not. We're not getting Denzel Ward for sure. You got to watch that. So I see him getting a lot of targets and a lot of action. I don't think it's going to. I think the last week of the season where Mason Rudolph was the quarterback, he only had 4 targets. That is not going to be the situation. And if Denzel Ward does play, I would expect to see Chase Claypool get more of his attention. And I think you'll see Deontay Johnson coming out of the slot. I think they'll be moving him around, and I think that actually would bode very well for him, especially if this secondary, even if you get some of them healthy, they haven't played together that much because it's been a different guy out each week. You could see a breakdown in coverage and stuff. So he is a guy that I actually, in the daily fantasy sports, think is a really good pickup, and only at $7,000.
No, I completely agree. Completely agree. I honestly, I was a little disappointed in his league performance this year,
Mm-hmm.
Deontay Johnson, just because he was pretty good last year. But yeah, as far as daily sports, obviously he's a great pick this week, especially at that salary range. So,
Yeah.
but Mike, we'll see how those do. We'll see how our first daily fantasy locks go next week. We'll recap those. But Mike, let's jump into Hell No Hell Yeah, my friend. And I know we talked before the show. We weren't going to show each other our notes before the show for this, so we're kind of going off the cuff here, if you will. And I think I got a good one for you here, buddy. Bursting onto the scene this year was Bills quarterback Josh Allen, and I think we all knew he was going to be a decent quarterback. Many thought top 10, probably for sure. Mike, Hell No Hell Yeah. Will Josh Allen continue top 5 production in 2021?
Top 5. I'm going to go with hell yeah. He was a
Okay.
guy that I tried to get at a value in every league.
And I think most people did get him at a value just because there was that wasn't top 5 expectations going into this year.
Was not top 5 expectations, but it was top 10, and it was because of his legs.
Right.
Now you
Right.
add the fact that I don't know what the hell happened, that that type of progression from year 2 to 3, that was insane. That was, I mean, this is amazing. It's wonderful to see. I'm happy for a young guy like him, and I'm happy for the Buffalo Bills, the Bills Mafia, to get to watch him. But I do see him being a top 5 quarterback with that core they have around him. That division has gotten a lot weaker with the Patriots not being what they were. The Jets are absolutely terrible. So he's got at least 6-8 matchups that I think I'm going to be happy with. The Dolphins defense looked pretty good this year, though. But then you add in the fact that Diggs is looking like a top 10 wide receiver. They're running the ball well enough. I think he's going to keep chucking the rock around, and John Brown's going to benefit. So I'm in on Josh Allen as a top 5.
Fair enough, my friend.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I'm going to ask you a Seahawks question to get somebody outside of the bias's opinion on this. Obviously, Mike, we talked about it on the show. Russell Wilson's impact this back half of the season has been a little underwhelming, right? Hasn't been bad, but underwhelming to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, he'll be 33 before the end of next season, which kind of puts you, you're getting on the fringe of twilight years for quarterbacks, right?
Yeah.
So you're on the back nine, as I like to call it. Yeah. Mike, hell no, hell yeah. We just talked about Josh Allen staying in the top 5, which I agree with. Mike, will Russell Wilson fall out of the top 5 next season? Hell no, hell yeah.
Hell no.
Oh.
To the no, no, no. Hell to the no.
I love it.
Outside of the fact that I think Russell Wilson as a competitor is one of my favorites. You start talking about 33. He's on the back end of his twilight. Look at Tom Brady. Look at Drew Brees. The NFL has changed the rules enough that these guys' career can be lengthened. So I think he's going to be fine, and he moves well. He has taken his fair share of hits, but I do think he still moves well. He's such a natural in the pocket that, like, if he loses a little bit of speed, it's not going to affect him as much. It helps him right now, but I still think he just maneuvers well enough there that he's going to be fine there. And then you look at who he has as weapons. Look at DK Metcalf. Look at Tyler Lockett. If Carson could stay healthy, I love him as a running back. So I don't see it in any way. I would just love them to get some protection for him. I'd love them to, maybe give him some decent looks and get that defense in order. If you could get some positive field position and, control a game a little more, I think you could really see Russell Wilson really blow up again. Like he was the start of the season where the defense was at least playing average. And they're actually, I shouldn't say average. They were playing poorly. It actually helped his fantasy stats. So if they don't get him a defense, who cares? He's going to help us fantasy managers. But yeah.
No, and just to piggyback off what you said, I agree. I think he's still going to be fine next season. The thing, and I guess I have a little more visibility into this as a Seahawks fan, is that offensive line's we got to improve that offensive line. If you don't improve that offensive line, it doesn't matter if you have Jerry Rice, Calvin Johnson, and Randy Moss out there at receiver. If he doesn't have time to throw, it doesn't matter. So definitely something the Seahawks and John Schneider definitely going to have to take a long, hard look at this offseason is how do we improve that offensive line? How do we get some consistent play out of that offensive line? I feel like that offensive line is very streaky. They have 2-3 week stretches where they're great, and then they have 4 or 5 week stretches where they're god awful. So we'll see what they do this offseason. So Mike, what you got for me, buddy?
All right, so the best position or the most important position everyone talks about is quarterback, right?
Sure.
One of my favorite nicknames, Danny Dimes. Do you see him being a top 10 quarterback next season with New York Giants in fantasy production?
Hell no.
Ooh.
Hell no. To the no, no, no. Hell to the no.
Well, they're too busy worried about being mad at Doug Peterson and the Eagles when they couldn't win more than 6 games this year. So Giants fans, you need to lay off that rhetoric. But Mike, this isn't necessarily a negative on Daniel Jones as much as it is. I think there are just a lot of young guys that are going to elevate to that next level, right? You think of guys like Justin Herbert, we mentioned earlier in the show. We think of a guy like Baker Mayfield, who's obviously coming into his own this year. I think, especially in Kevin Stefanski's new offense, Baker looks like a new quarterback. Not to say that he was bad before, but he looks more comfortable, right? You think of a guy who has some weapons, a sneaky top 10 guy like maybe a Kirk Cousins next year. Not saying that he will be, but a guy that could sneak in at 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have guys like Ryan Tannehill and Josh Allen that have burst onto the scene. So it's not so much due to his ability as it is to about who else will be in the top 10. We think of a guy even like a Deshaun Watson who won the passing title this year. It was on a 4-12 team. If he could somehow get some more wins and some more things going, he could be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. So, he is this year, but he could stay in the top 10. So I think it's more about who's going to stay in the top 10 and who could make that transition from 11 to 16 into the top 10. And I just don't see him as one of those guys. Not yet. I think it's a lack of weapons. We talked about it earlier. Darius Slayton hasn't performed well. Golden Tate hasn't done anything since he's got to New York. Yeah. Sterling Shepard's on the back 9. So it's one of those things where he's really got Saquon Barkley and Evan Ingram, and that's it. And that offensive line is probably one of the few offensive lines worse than Seattle's offensive line. So, obviously they have some work to do on that. So, no, unfortunately, like I said, not so much due to his ability as it is to the things going on around him.
Okay. Hey, Big T is in YouTube. Thanks for coming back. He said, hell yeah, Wilson's out of there. We obviously disagree there. And then we have another question. I will frame this a little bit to help us out. If you have a 2-keeper league, would you keep DK Metcalf?
Oh, if I had a 2-player keeper league or a 2
players each from this roster to the next season. That means it's basically the first 2 picks.
Yeah, I would. I guess I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm a Seahawks fan, but DK Metcalf has solidified himself as a top 5 wide receiver.
Outside of the Rams, he's been dominant, right?
Yeah, outside that Rams game, he's been dominant, and games, I should say, he's been very good. He's had top 5 numbers, so I think I guess it would determine who your running backs are.
That's the first thing I want to know.
As we said earlier in the show, wide receiver depth was pretty good this year, where running back depth was non-existent. So It did not exist at running back. So I guess I would need to know who your running backs are. But if you have a RB1 and then like an RB2-ish, like a Joe Mixon, I'd keep him over like a Joe Mixon or a Todd Gurley, an RB2. If you have 2 bona fide RB1s, there's something to be said there. If you have a McCaffrey and you picked up a James Robinson, maybe not. But if you had,
that's a tough one, yeah.
That's what I mean though. If you have 2 legitimate RB1s, that makes the conversation a little different. But if you have like a
guarantee next year, James Robinson or DK Metcalf? The other question is this a one-off for DK Metcalf? I don't think it's a one-off. That's why I'm so happy about him.
I mean, Henry and a garbage pail RB2, he says in chat. Then I would keep Henry and Metcalf easily.
I agree.
So I guess that answers that. But, just to paint a picture for if somebody has a different situation like this, if you have anybody that's, 12th or lower on the running back projections, I'm probably not going to keep them and keep DK.
Metcalf. I think Metcalf has more upside.
Yep, I agree. So, all right, buddy, what else you got for me?
All right, so you talked about the Bills a little bit. Brian Daboll is being talked about as a possible candidate for the Jets. They've already requested an interview, and he's reportedly high on the Jaguars' wish list. Trevor Lawrence with Brian Daboll is a top 10 quarterback in fantasy terms in 2 years if he is his mentor. So I'm expecting this to be, in Jacksonville.
That's a great question, and I'm going to say, hell yeah.
All right.
Mike, and I think this is more of a will Trevor Lawrence be top 10 in 2 years? Yeah, I could see it. We talked about it last week on the show when the Jets screwed themselves out of the first pick.
Terrible.
He's going into a very good situation for, I think of it kind of like Justin Herbert out in LA. He's going into a favorable situation when it comes to weapons around him.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the offensive line needs a little work, like we discussed.
Yeah.
Which could be said for most teams, at this point in the season. Teams that are drafting that low. So I don't necessarily say hell yeah due to Brian Dable as much as I say hell yeah to just Trevor Lawrence's pure ability being top 10 worthy. I definitely see him being in a Justin Herbert sort of tier that's probably, the floor. I shouldn't say the floor, ceiling.
Floor.
Yeah. I mean, ceiling is probably
Justin Herbert, 9th rated quarterback in fantasy terms this season in 15 games. That's pretty good.
Right. I mean, that could be the ceiling, and then, floor is more like a Kirk Cousins sort of area. But, I think you said it was 2 years from now, so not his rookie season, but the season after. Yeah. I mean, as long as they keep some of those weapons around, they keep guys like DJ Chark and James Robinson around. I don't see why he wouldn't be with most coaches, as long as the coach isn't completely, I don't want to use the brain dead word, but I'll use it anyways, brain dead, as long as the coach isn't dumb or an idiot, as long as it isn't
Freddie Kitchens.
Freddie Kitchens down there calling plays, he should be fine. So
I actually really like if Babel went there, you could basically do the same stuff you do with Josh Allen. They're both above average athletic running quarterbacks. They can throw the ball well, and they're big, so they can take a few hits if you need to. So I think that kind of stuff bodes well for young quarterbacks, where you're not just having to drop back play after play. You can kind of make a defense play your legs as well, and it keeps a guy out of the secondary, or maybe they're blitzing, it gets you some easy throws.
And we talked about a guy like Tua Tagovailoa last week, or 2 weeks ago, rather, who has thrown 0 interceptions out of a clean pocket. And it comes down to rookie mistakes, Mike. And I'll say young guy mistakes. Guys that have been in the league 1, 2, 3 years. And I think Trevor Lawrence is probably, we compared him to Andrew Luck last week, probably the surest thing when it comes to a guy that we trust not to make those mistakes, right? So, I that's one of the things that I, even as an Ohio State fan watching that game last week, he did have a rough game, but most, for every other game but one of his entire career, 2 maybe, he's made great decisions. So it's
that game was mostly that Ohio State's defensive line outclassed Clemson's offensive line, right? They were
he was under duress the whole
game.
But in terms of just making pure young guy mistakes, I don't see him being a guy that'll do that. So
do you think he'll be as good? This is a question from a playmaker. Will he be as good as Mahomes? No. Patrick Mahomes might be the best of all time.
Yeah, I'd say Patrick Mahomes is probably going to be in Montana Brady territory before this is all said and done.
Yeah.
So
but
Michael, not at all. Well, Michael, I figure since we don't have any wire fire this week, since the season is over for most of the playmakers out there, no, thank God we're not diving into that crazy cesspool this week. God, that was the last half of the season. That was brutal. But we did have some hits. So playmakers, go back and review some of that stuff. We did have some hits in wire fire. Mike, I figure we would take, this time to reflect a little bit on our first season, our first year of working the wire. Obviously, you and I did the Big Play podcast with Big Play Jay last year or so, and we sat down as COVID and everything was ravaging everything, and we put our heads together and we took a long, hard look at what we both have a passion for, what we both have, what we feel amateur expert knowledge in. If you want to look at it from that sort of lens. And this was it, guys. It was fantasy football. Mike and I, obviously, I have a long-standing history of playing fantasy football. I've been playing since I was 10 years old. Had my first team in '99. Won that league, by the way, with Jeff George. Thank you very much.
Jeff George, that's a name.
Jeff George, baby. I will love Jeff George for the rest of my life because of that. And one of the things we looked on from our time with the Big Play podcast is what did we do well? And we even reached out to some of the people we knew watched the show and valued what we were doing. And we said, hey, what did we bring to the table? What did you like? And one of the things that we got a consistent feedback on was, hey, we really liked when you and Mike got into your fantasy locks every week. We felt that was that was awesome. You guys hit on a lot of your picks. Somebody brought up my Devontae Freeman pick from last season. Yeah. And it got them into the playoffs, I guess. So because they won the head-to-head against that guy or something. But it was a memorable pick for him. So and that was something that we got a lot of feedback on was, hey, your fantasy locks were on point. You guys know what you're talking about. You guys should do a fantasy football show. And I think just from hearing that's what pushed us in this direction, Mike. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how we navigate the waters of this off season. And, as we try to bring some more analysis and things like that to the mix, because obviously we won't have the weekly push every week as far as wire fire, things like that. And I'm sure we'll get into more of this as we go on. But I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to have some fun. We'll probably bring back a little fringe binge if you guys were big play podcast fans. I would like to get some guests on the show. So we're gonna do a lot of things. We are gonna take a little bit of a break. I think Mike and I are in agreement. Yes. And Mike, I'll let you, if you feel you should mention why. I'll leave that to you. But we're going to take a little bit of a break, guys. I am expecting my second child in the middle of May. So from probably about the middle of May to July, once mini camps and training camps start kicking back off, I think we'll get back into it. But, we'll take some time to analyze the draft, obviously analyze all the free agent moves and things that happen between now and then. And like I said, around the middle of May to some point in July, probably after the holiday, we'll take a little bit of a break and then be back with you guys. And then that's not to say we won't pop a couple minute thing here or there or whatever. But Mike, as you look back on the year, what are your thoughts? How do you think the show's gone for the first run?
I think it went really well. I want to kind of shout out our Playmakers family, everybody who kind of chimes in every week. The one thing we've seen is the chat has been growing and week to week. We've really, really enjoyed that. We've had some return, chat each week and people asking questions, and we've been able to interact. That's my favorite part. And then after that, I think Wirefire, like you mentioned, I'm in a lot of competitive leagues, and you have, if there's no limit on moves, you are always jockeying who's the best person I should have on my bench. And it changes week to week with, hey, 4 running backs went down last week. You need to have a couple running backs stowed away, or all of a sudden wide receivers are out, or COVID this year. So that was one that I really enjoyed. It was a challenge. Like, it really was, because we were trying to limit it to a small subsection of not as own players. So that was one I really enjoyed. And then something for me to look forward to. And maybe I'll work on this during that break. Blake is expecting his second child. I'll be expecting my first. That is why we'll probably go on that break.
Hey, there it is.
Exciting. Yeah.
I was gonna let you say it, not me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I do. And I think it'll be something where maybe we can work on getting out rankings ahead of the season, ahead of the draft season key, and then maybe do some weekly rankings, and I don't know if it's maybe let's focus on those bottom half, like the 30 or like 20 to 35 or something, just the position where people are truly questioning. Because if you're questioning whether you start Devontae Adams or like Calvin Ridley or Tyreek Hill, you're not really questioning anything. Like, you're going to get something. Just start 2 and just have fun with it at that point. So the people who are struggling with it, I kind of want to help them a little more and help them get to the playoffs and everything like that. Hey, Jay. I just went Jay on you. Blake, we had a nice little shout out to your Boston Scott pick in the chat right now.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. My Boston Scott pick. Yeah, he had a big it was a Sunday night or Monday night football game. Yeah, earlier this year. It was a night game.
Yeah, it was a night game.
I know it was a night.
That's good
against the Giants, I think.
Yeah, so. He played well. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, they liked our division review from last year as well.
Yeah, that's something, Mike. I think speaking from
season, right?
Yeah, personal standpoint is I like to go division by division and break down division and by position. So, we like to break that down, and obviously, what do you want to see, guys? What's something you liked, didn't like? We are a completely flexible show here. We are here to help you. A lot of podcasts just put it out there, and you can take it or leave it. We want to be interactive. We want to know what you need from us. We consider ourselves, like I said, amateur experts. We'll use that hashtag, I guess. But the reason we did this was to help the playmakers. We can sit here and drone on and on about the NBA scores from this week or the whatever, and bring in hot dog champions. And granted, that was a great interview.
Do not knock that, though.
That was a great interview. But my point is, we wanted to, and this is something I think Mike will agree with. We sat down and said, okay, what can we do to, one, interact with the playmakers, and two, how do we help with something? How do we offer something that's valuable to you? And this is what we did. So, and I think for the most part, it went very well, and I'm excited. Congratulations to you and your wife for your first child. I'm very pumped for you guys. So, like I said, guys, we'll take a little bit of a break from like middle of May to sometime in July, and we'll make sure we keep you guys posted on both of our social medias and the podcast social medias. Which, by the way, give us a follow at WTW_podcast on Twitter. That's where the show goes out each and every week. We also do our weekly help sessions from the podcast account. Obviously, give our parent account, BigPlay_com on Twitter, a follow. That's where all of our great shows go out. Mondays we have the Yacht Club and the Big Play Cleveland Reflog show. Those are more of our Cleveland-oriented shows. Tuesdays we have the Birdland BS guys, and then obviously we follow them up after they wrap up about 9 o'clock. Wednesdays, we have Put On My Take. Thursdays, in the backfield with Peyton Hillis. And then on Sundays, our Browns postgame show, Voice of the Lamb. But, guys, make sure we're giving all those guys some love, too. Obviously, they help out the show as well, give us some feedback. And but, yeah, like I said, we are here to help. This is your show as much as it is ours. So is the way I would put it. So, Michael, as we wrap up the 2020 season, my friend, fantasy football season, anything else for the playmakers?
I'm going to give you a round of applause, Blake. Nice job hosting. Very, very nice job. Very well prepared.
I had very big black and yellow wrestling boots to fill. So, and he knows who he is out there. So, I had very big shoes to fill, and I appreciate you saying that. It's my first go at a full-time hosting gig, but it's been fun, man. I'm really looking forward to it, and we're gonna be doing some other stuff with Big Play too as the winter goes on. And I know I keep saying about gaming. We're gonna eventually get that going here.
You're gaming every week, though, man. You're putting.
I'm gaming
out
almost
there
every night, but I got a 9-month-old and a 5-month pregnant wife upstairs. They're in bed by 8 o'clock, so I'm gaming every night, man. It just depends on if I'm live on a camera or not. So, but yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, and then give yourself a round of applause as well, my friend, if you will. I appreciate you. Appreciate you willing to jump on board with this, and I'm having fun, man. Let's keep this rig rolling. So
keep talking football. It's gonna be fun. Just interact with these peeps.
Can't beat it, man. And obviously, guys, we do this for the love of the game. Not to be a cliche guy, but that's really why we do it. So, with that said, guys, like I said, be sure to give us a follow on Twitter. Hopefully everybody had a good start to their new year. We hope that 2021 is better for each and every one of you out there, playmakers. We will catch you next week.